evening. You're watching ARIRANG News at 8. It's Thursday, January 16th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I am Yoo Ji-hye. We begin this evening in New Delhi, where President Park Geun-hye held a bilateral summit with her Indian counterpart, Manmohan Singh, on this Thursday. The two leaders agreed to upgrade their free trade pact as early as possible and take necessary measures to nurture a favorable business environment for investors in both countries. Our presidential office correspondent Eoh Jin-joo, who is traveling with the president, sends us this report.
President Park's visit to India aims at laying the path for Korean firms to more easily enter the world's second-largest market by population. One of the most notable accomplishments of the summit talks between President Park and Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on Thursday was the two leaders deciding to quickly upgrade the Korea-India Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA, so that it covers not only goods but also investments and services. The two countries will be holding ministerial-level talks on the matter in March. Both leaders also agreed to revise the tax treaty between the two nations to reduce the tax burden on Korean and Indian companies operating in each other's countries and to prevent double taxation. President Park has also sought an expansion in financial support for Korean firms willing to take part in infrastructure projects in India, part of its 5-year development plan, with MOUs having been signed between Korea's Exim Bank and Indian financial institutions. POSCO-style project to build a steel mill in the Indian state of Odisha looks like it's finally back on track, with President Park securing promises from the Indian government to resolve the obstacles that have been blocking progress for roughly 9 years now. The Korean steel giant was granted an environmental clearance for the 2,700 acres of land required for the project and also secured a promise from the Odisha state government to grant POSCO a prospecting license for an iron ore mine some 300 kilometers from the steel mill. On Friday, President Park will attend events that are focused on cooperation in the sector of the creative economy and meet with Indian business leaders to call for further investment in Korea. Eoh Jin-joo, ARIRANG News, New Delhi.
South Korea is set to launch a task force to boost economic cooperation with North Korea and Russia as part of President Park's Eurasian Initiative policy. The Seoul's foreign ministry says the task force will launch as soon as February, with about 5 government officials reviewing various joint economic projects among the three nations, including construction of railways, roads, and pipelines that could eventually run through the two Koreas and Russia. It added the three-way cooperation could help encourage the reclusive North to open up and eventually improve inter-Korean relations. In a landmark step that could increase political pressure on Japan, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill addressing the issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement, marking the first time the matter has been included in the U.S. legislature. Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
U.S. lawmakers are formally calling on their government to pay more attention to the so-called comfort women, or women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during the Second World War. In a document attached to a spending bill for 2014, the U.S. House of Representatives makes note of a 2007 resolution on the comfort women issue and urges the Secretary of State to encourage the government of Japan to address the issues raised in the resolution. The 2007 resolution calls on the Japanese government to issue an official apology for its wartime sexual enslavement of women. An estimated 200,000 females, mostly Korean, were used as sex slaves by the Japanese army in the early 20th century, and many are still waiting for an apology from Tokyo, although time is running out for the aging victims. The bill passed on Wednesday is not legally binding, but is highly symbolic of Washington's efforts to address the matter. It marks the first time the comfort women issue has been included in U.S. legislation and is sure to ramp up pressure on the Japanese government. Korea's foreign ministry welcomed the bill and reiterated its calls on the Japanese government to apologize for its wartime crimes.
일본 정부는 The Japanese government must humbly admit the universal crime of violating women's human rights that were committed during its imperial period and resolve the issue. I once again strongly urge the Japanese government to do so.
Although the bill still requires Senate approval and a signature from President Barack Obama, Seoul's foreign ministry said that the bill is a sign that the comfort women matter is no longer just a regional issue, but a global one. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
Although North Korean leader Kim Jong-un started off the year expressing hopes of bettering inter-Korean relations, it didn't take very long for his regime to threaten nuclear war on the Korean peninsula. That came on Wednesday, and Seoul responded the day after. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Inter-Korean ties will plunge into a deadlock, and an unimaginable holocaust and disaster will follow should South Korea and the United States go ahead with their nuclear war drills and military provocations.
One day after the threat of Pyongyang, Seoul answered with his own promise.
We will sternly retaliate against North Korea if the North carries out military provocations.
Speaking to reporters on Thursday, Defense Ministry spokesman Kim Min-seok said the annual key result for Eagle drills would go on as planned between late February and April, and also called North Korea's threat that they would push inter-Korean ties toward catastrophe, quote, self-contradictory. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, Seoul and Washington wrapped up a high-profile military session on Wednesday in Hawaii. Roughly 40 defense and foreign affairs officials took part in the two-day extended deterrence policy committee tabletop exercise at the U.S. Pacific Command. In addition to briefings on key defense capabilities, representatives from both countries discussed possible responses to a nuclear crisis on the Korean peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
The Supreme Court on Thursday handed down prison terms and penalties for 3 sitting lawmakers on charges of illegal electioneering ahead of the 2012 general elections. Lee Jae-young of the ruling Saenuri Party and Hyun Young-hee, an independent lawmaker who used to be affiliated with the ruling party, each received prison terms, while Shin Jang-yong of the main opposition Democratic Party received a fine. This means all 3 lawmakers will be stripped of their parliamentary seats. At least 5 other lawmakers faced possibility of losing their posts on charges of violating the Public Official Election Act. Political watchers say the shakeup means up to 15 seats will be up for grabs for the July 30th by-election. On our one-on-one this evening, we look into President Park's 3-year plan for economic innovation, which she proclaimed during her New Year's press conference. While the finalized policies are set to be announced by the end of next month, what we know for now is that the government will center on 3 objectives. First, the strengthening economic fundamentals. Second, nurturing a creative and innovative economy. And lastly, boosting domestic demand. Now, under the plan, the president said Korea's growth potential would grow to around 4%, with 70% employment rates and annual per capita income of around $40,000. Now, for analysis on this ambitious plan and whether it is feasible, we now bring in Eoh Jin-joo, president of the Asia Finance Society. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
On Wednesday, the government announced a policy direction for this 3-year plan. What did you make of it? Do you think it is going in the right direction?
As you mentioned, the 3-year economic innovation plan is composed of 3 parts. Firstly, normalizing what has been abnormal so far, in particular reform of the public sector. Secondary, encouraging domestic demand, in particular development of service sector, and also lastly the creative economic encouragement. I think considering the Korean economic situation, whose potential economic growth is decreasing continuously, direction and the vision is quite right. to which the Korean economy should go forward.
Well, the President Park's plan is reminiscent of the 5-year economic development plan, which was designed by her father and former President Park Geun-hye. Now, what are some of the notable similarities and differences?
Well, I think in the 1960s, when the former President Park Geun-hye set up the 5-year economic development plan, Korea was quite poor. Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. Therefore, a 5-year economic development plan was targeted at escaping from the extreme poverty with the help of huge investment, government-led investment of natural resources, human resources, and capitals, and also the export-led economic policy. But on the other hand, the new 3 economic innovation plan is targeted to raise our economic potential growth through the economic innovation rather than huge investment, in particular driven by the private sector. Therefore, I think that is a totally different one. The new 3-year economic innovation plan is targeted to jump up to advanced countries with the help of great reform and innovation. Therefore, I think the former 5-year economic plan is based on the quantitative economic strategy, economic growth strategy. But on the other hand, the new 3-year economic innovation plan is qualitative reform and innovation economic development strategy. So, on that sense, both are totally different one. Maybe a similarity, maybe both took a 3-year time schedule or 5-year time schedule. But I think in the new 3-year economic innovation plan, seems a little bit time schedule is a little bit tighter because only 3 or 4 years. For instance, the similar plan were implemented in the UK by the former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She actually implemented a similar plan in 11 years. Therefore, I think a 3-year time schedule seems a little bit quite tight.
Too tight. I see. Well, some say Park's suggestions are nothing new. I mean, including, you just mentioned deregulation and also the private sector reform. Other than these measures, are there any more ideas that you think should be included to supplement the plan?
Well, I think the actually reform is more difficult than even revolution. Therefore, I think the first of all, how to overcome the expected strong resistance of stakeholders, such as labor union, even bureaucrats, because of they have enjoyed a lot of rent by the regulation. Therefore, how to overcome this strong resistance of stakeholders is very important issues. And also, I think, therefore, direction and the vision is quite right, but how to design strategy and the tactics to implement this design is very, very, very important. And secondly, I think currently in the Korean economy, investment, increasing rate of investment is decreasing continuously. Therefore, I think in order to raise the increase rate of investment, I think the more investment-friendly environment should be improved rather than regulation. Currently in Korea, so-called economic democratization, many regulations have been introduced. Therefore, I think how to overcome such a lot of regulation under the name of economic democratization. That's also another issue.
All right. So let's say the plan is to be well implemented. Do you think her goal of reaching the 4% growth and 70% employment rate and annual per capita income of $40,000 is feasible?
Whereas there is a so-called 474 economic agenda seems very ambitious. But I think as we discussed, such reforms, depending on how to implement the reform, if the reform will be implemented as planned, our potential economic growth rate will be raised to around 4% from currently 3.5%. And also in the knowledge-based high-value added service sector, such as finance, education, tourism, etc., I think if the reform will be implemented sufficiently, the job of more than 600,000 will be created. Therefore, I think 70% of employment also will be achieved. Therefore, I think, in my calculation, if the Korean economy will grow 4% annually, around 30,000 per capita income US dollar, $30,000 US dollar per capita income will be attained in about 3 years later. Therefore, I think depending on the success or failure of reform, if the reform will be successfully implemented, the agenda, very seemingly ambitious agenda of 474 could be attained.
Let's certainly hope so. Thank you very much, Mr. Oh, for joining us this evening.
Welcome.
Very vivid.
Touch base with journalists, experts, and analysts who are taking the pulse of Asia's heartbeat.
South Korea's defense minister.
In a lively half hour, join ARIRANG's Eoh Jin-joo for the day's top stories, current affairs, business, technology trends, plus global weather forecasts and more. ARIRANG News. Every weeknight, live on ARIRANG TV.
The country's banks plan to increase lending to small and mid-sized firms this year as the economic recovery gains pace. The Financial Services Commission said Thursday that lending to smaller businesses would rise by $33 billion this year, up 27% from last year. The financial watchdog cited a more positive outlook for the Korean economy as the primary reason for the uptick in loans, as more firms will seek financial assistance for investments on the back of rising demand. The bank's move is also in line with President Park Geun-hye's drive to protect the financially vulnerable and expand support for small firms. In the fourth of our five-part series on Korea's industrial competitiveness, we look into the country's world-leading shipbuilding industry that has been on a wild and rather unpredictable ride in recent years. Our Song Jae-sun tells us, though, that the future is looking much rosier despite growing competition from China. Here's what to expect from the industry in 2014.
The global shipbuilding industry is recovering from a long slump, and last year, Korea's major shipbuilders won more orders than they targeted. The big three, Samsung, Hyundai Heavy Industries, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, logged a combined total of $53 billion in orders, a 7-year high. When measured in terms of gross tonnage, the orders are nearly double from the previous year. Three Northeast Asian nations of China, Korea, and Japan make up almost 90% of the world ship orders won, and China overtook Korea to become number one in 2007, taking advantage of massive ship orders placed by local ship operators and lower production costs. Korean shipbuilders now focus more on complex and expensive vessels, such as LNG carriers and drill ships, as they can no longer compete with their Chinese rivals in pricing. And the new year looks brighter for Korea's shipbuilders, since there are more offshore plant orders in the works.
What makes us busy these days are offshore plant orders that account for about half of total ship orders.
The LNG carrier orders are expected to rise this year, and the order of offshore plants are also continuously growing. We are anticipating robust growth at a similar level as last year.
Foreign firms are also flocking to Korea to learn from Korean shipbuilders. This corporation has moved its headquarters to Seoul district of Gangnam-gu to strengthen ties with Korea's leading shipbuilders.
Korea is at the center of the global offshore and marine industry, and that if we want to be number one, if we want to succeed as a global marine offshore business, we have to succeed in Korea first.
Industry analysts say Korean shipbuilders are now poised to benefit from a new global trend of requiring eco-friendly ships with better fuel efficiency and less emissions. 송지선, 아리랑 뉴스.
China has called on the IMF to stick to a commitment to give emerging markets a greater say at the organization after the U.S. failed to authorize the funding needed to make the change. Son Jung-in reports.
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei has called on International Monetary Fund member nations to implement a plan that would give emerging markets more power and representation within the organization. His remarks on Wednesday seem to target the U.S., which is the IMF's largest veto power, after its lawmakers Monday failed to agree on funding measures needed for the reforms to progress. The reforms were first approved by IMF member countries in 2010. The reform package seeks to double the fund's lending capacity to more than $730 billion and shift voting shares to emerging markets and underrepresented countries. The IMF had previously intended to put the reforms into effect before October 2012, but the U.S. Congress is apparently in no hurry to approve any changes. Conservative U.S. House Republicans oppose the plan, which will shift more power to countries such as China, India, and Brazil. They also see the reforms as tantamount to approving fresh funding in a tight budget environment. IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde expressed her disappointment with the setback, but added that she's hopeful the U.S. administration will continue to work on securing the necessary legislative authorization for the changes. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
A group of ambitious young Korean students got some practice in the art of diplomacy at a Model United Nations conference this week, where they tackled various global challenges like pros. Our Kim Young-gil was there.
A Model United Nations conference was held in Seoul Thursday to discuss some of the world's most pressing issues: world hunger, access to education, and climate change. Each participant represents a country and puts their own agenda on the table for discussion. The World Federation of United Nations Associations has prepared this program to give young people the opportunity to explore global challenges.
And this youth forum really aims to give youth an opportunity to learn more, to get inspired, and to also acquire some skills that are necessary to meet those challenges.
5th to 12th grade students have gone through 1 week of training led by professionals from international organizations, NGOs, academia, and other relevant fields.
Through their participation in this program and in Model United Nations, students have learned about the United Nations and its work in sustainable development and achieving the end of poverty.
Ways to tackle world hunger and poverty was the most debated topic. The students agreed that extreme hunger and poverty affects one's access to education, health, and protection. They also drafted resolutions that would provide small loans to individuals living in poverty in order to help them become economically self-sufficient. As well as this, the students drafted initiatives to provide less developed countries with strategies to implement their own homegrown school feeding programs.
I represent the delegate of Mexico, and the educational environment in Mexico is really good. Through this youth forum program, I learned that our opportunity in Korea is so better than other developing countries.
The students said they were able to gain a greater understanding of how the UN works and the challenges world leaders face when approaching global issues.
Through this conference, these young people had the opportunity to convey their thoughts on how to deal with the world's most pressing issues. And who knows, maybe one of these students could follow in the footsteps of Korea's most well-known diplomat, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
While people in the Philippines are dealing with floods, those in China are facing dangerous levels of fine dust, which is also affecting us here in Korea. For more, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Well, Tia, it was a hectic start to the year around the globe. Now, more than 2 days of torrential rain in the southern Philippines has left at least 24 dead. And over in Beijing, fine dust readings soared 25 times the normal levels. Back here in the nation, it was a smoggy day with a pre-fine dust warning issued in Seoul. Currently, the nation is at the edge of a high-pressure system from the West Sea, which is why we're seeing cloudy skies across the map. Well, at this hour, Seoul is seeing 170 micrograms per cubic meter of fine dust, which is 3 times the normal levels. Keep in mind that higher levels of fine dust are forecast for tomorrow morning, so those of you with respiratory problems must take caution. Other than that, dry weather advisories are still in effect in most parts of the East Coast region, so please continue to be careful not to start any fires. Looking ahead at tomorrow's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -5 degrees with a high of 5. Meanwhile, Daegu and Gwangju hits 7. Moving on to other regions, Jeju makes it to 7 degrees while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang peak at 3 and -2 degrees respectively. Well, please tune in for future weather updates regarding fine dust. Back to you, Ji-hye.
Thanks, Bo-kyung. And that's a broadcast on this Thursday evening. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. Thanks for watching.